Good morning. Welcome back to Professional Insights, brought to you by the National Referral Network, where insights from professionals help elevate all professionals and anyone that cares to watch the video. And this morning, we've got Jeff Marsocci, estate planning attorney out of North Carolina. We're going to talk about a very interesting topic. But first, Jeff, how are you doing this morning?
Oh, I'm doing great.
I love it.
Looking forward to this.
Awesome. So we've had estate planning attorneys on the show before, Jeff, but the email that you sent me was very interesting in that you wanted to talk about in-law protection. And I did a little bit of research and I couldn't necessarily find in-law protection. So explain to the viewers what in-law protection is.
Well, okay. When I talk with my estate planning clients, some of them have adult children, and occasionally there's, well, wait a minute, one of my kids is going through a divorce or another one's going through a divorce. And in fact, if you really look at it statistically, if you have 3 adult children that are in their 30s or older, at least one of them, if not 2, have gone through a divorce.
Okay.
And so having protection around whatever you may be leaving your adult children can become very important. And this is the scenario that ends up happening all the time. Parents pass on, they leave the money to the kids, and the spouse starts whispering in their ear, "Oh, honey, you've got all this money now from your parents. We can buy that dream house we've always been talking about." And so they get a realtor, they start looking around, and the realtor goes, "Okay, well, wait a minute. Do we need to get a mortgage company involved?" "Oh, no, we're paying cash." Okay, great. They find the house, they get all the information to the attorney, and the attorney goes, "Oh, well, I'm the closing attorney, they're married, so this is going to be tenancy by the entirety." And they buy the house. And then a couple of years later, the spouse ends up taking up with the personal trainer and starts running around and is heading for divorce. And I want half the house, but all the money came from my parents. Well, I talked with a divorce attorney and you co-mingled it. I want half the house. And that's where the money goes.
So Jeff, what is the difference between in-law protection and say asset protection? Or is it in-law protection is just kind of the layman's terms, but it's really asset protection?
That's exactly it.
Okay.
So when you're doing estate planning, if you are leaving everything directly to your children, then this can end up exposing that inheritance to things like divorce. And believe me, a lot of my clients have actually told me this. I want to make sure that if anything happens to my child, that my money isn't going to my son-in-law or my daughter-in-law's next spouse and their kids. I need to make sure that everything's staying within my family. So if I leave stuff to my children and they end up passing on, they can't leave it to the spouse. They've got to leave it to their kids. Or if there are no kids, it's going to my other kids within their trust.
So you mentioned a couple of things in there, Jeff. What are some specific clauses and provisions that someone should include in their trust to prevent something like this from happening?
Well, this is actually a little more of a complicated setup, but it works. What we're essentially doing is setting up asset management trust. It's just kind of a generational trust. Okay. So if my clients are setting up a revocable living trust, they want to avoid probate. That's a good estate planning goal for a lot of my clients. If they have those 3 kids, they're leaving everything from the revocable trust down to those 3 asset management trusts. So it's in those trusts, there's a separate trustee, and now the child can get whatever they need. So let's go back to that dream house. "Oh, honey, we can get that dream house we've always been looking for." Okay. They talk with the trustee. The trustee buys the house into the trust. They don't give them the money and say,
Gotcha.
Here you go. And so now that house is sealed up tight in that asset management trust. So when the spouse says, "I want a divorce, I want half the house," I don't even own half the house. In fact, I talked with the trustee. "Here's your eviction papers. You got 1 month to get out." And it's secure. So any of those big purchases happen within the trust, and then they can give them little bits of money here and there, or we want to take a better vacation or whatnot. But this is the way that you end up preserving it.
So what other ways do people commingle funds that can get wrapped up into a trust? Like you mentioned houses, right? Obviously that's the largest. What are
Yeah.
the things that you can commingle that should not be commingled?
Oh, they just go to the financial advisor that they've been working with and they have joint accounts. Oh, I'll just put all the money into the joint account.
Okay.
That commingles it as well. Bank accounts. It's
So
simpler usually with
savings,
not a lot of money.
checking, like joint IRAs, anything that is a joint.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anytime you get that money and then you go ahead and put it into something joint, you've commingled it. It's no longer protected. You end up getting a divorce. That becomes an issue. That money's on the table.
Interesting. So how can you ensure like some of these protective measures remain effective and enforceable over time?
Well, the important thing is that you do have to have a separate trustee. You cannot have your child be the trustee over their own trust and expect to have that type of protection. It's not going to happen because if you are the trustee and the beneficiary of that trust, you can do whatever you want. You're not going to have that protection. So you've got to have a good trustee. So this can be an individual or it can be a professional fiduciary. It can be a trust company. There are lots of different ways to do this, but it's important to not put your child in charge of their own trust in this situation.
And then you mentioned, because I watched one of your other videos, which you do some phenomenal education stuff on your YouTube channel, which as a plug, there'll be a link in the description below.
Thank you.
But one of the things that you talked about is you get married, you get a divorce, you're not protected. Some of the estate goes to the in-law, and then they get remarried, and then that estate transfers to that marriage, and then all of a sudden that somebody way down the line takes the money and gives it to their kid and not your kid.
Yeah.
So are there provisions to prevent that from happening?
Well, and I see this all the time with attorneys that don't necessarily focus on estate planning as their main thing. They just kind of do it as a side gig, and unfortunately, it happens all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to put into my trust. I want everything to go to my kids. Oh, if one of the kids passes on before I do, then I want my share to go down to their kids.
Okay.
Well, what if they don't die in that order? That's the big contingency you have to look at. What if they're supposed to get the money? They do outlive you, but then a couple of years later, there's that tragic accident and their spouse ends up inheriting all that stuff. They could still be young enough and that they're going to want to get married. And then, naturally, we've been married for 5-6 years. That in-law is going to end up doing their estate planning. I'm leaving everything to my spouse. So that's how the money goes. If it's sealed up tight in one of those asset management trusts, then all of those contingencies are what you put in as the person setting up the trust originally, not what your kid does, not what their spouse does. It's all according to your plan.
So I can see that this being heavily contested, Jeff, right? You have a house, you think that, and it doesn't matter either way, man, woman, and you're living in this house and you've built this future that you seem to think that you've built. And all of a sudden something like this happens, the house goes into the trust and now I'm out in the cold, right? I don't get anything. And I could see this being contested. Is it contested? And could somebody break that trust and get part of that inheritance?
Well, look, in North Carolina and a lot of other states, you have elected judges. But, if what this is it's an inheritance that's coming from your parents into this asset management trust, and the trust is buying the house, how is the spouse going to say, oh, that's mine, it came from our money? They didn't have to sign any mortgage papers. In fact, they weren't even in the closing. It was the trustee who was buying the house. So they never had their name on it. They just get to live there for free. Actually, that's not a bad deal, isn't it?
It's not a no. And so
right.
And something like that, let's take this a step farther. Husband and wife, they get divorced. That goes fine. Husband remarries. He passes away, and this house is in the trust. And then she gets remarried, and I know this gets convoluted, but this happens, right? She gets remarried. Can she stay in the house?
Well, no, let's go back to that original trust. It was mom and dad that left the money into the trust for, let's just say it's Jim Doe. The
Yep.
parents are John and Jane Doe. It's Jim Doe and his wife, Jessica, and they've got 2 kids.
Okay.
All right, that house is purchased into the asset management trust. Mom and dad, John and Jane Doe, they've passed on. It's Jim Doe and Jessica. Okay, they pick out a house. The trustee, cousin Ron, is the trustee. Ron buys the house into the trust, and that trust lists that Jim Doe is the beneficiary, and after Jim Doe, it goes to the kids. That's it. It's going down to the grandkids. It's not Jim Doe's money. It's not Jessica Doe's money. It's the trust's money. It's the trust assets, and the trust said it goes to Jim, and if anything happens to Jim, it goes to Jim's children.
Now, can the children elect to keep mom in the house?
Depends on how old they are. Depends what they can work out with the trustee.
I mean, I can see the mom, like, it could go, I'm not picking on the mom here, but I can see the mom being like, hey, I don't have anywhere to go. And hey, keep me in the house, and kind of that parental pressure.
Yeah. But it's not, Jessica isn't John and Jane Doe's kids, and their goal is to provide for their family. Just as, in the US at least, Jessica's parents, they're not going to provide anything for Jim. They're concerned with their daughter and their grandchildren.
Interesting. Now, we could go on for a long time with this one, because there's a lot of scenarios, Jeff. But as we wrap up real quick, how often should estate plans be reviewed and potentially updated to make sure these things are covered?
Well, what I tell my clients, particularly my trust clients, we should be getting together at least once a year just to review the situation, make sure the situation hasn't changed. Probably more so with revocable living trust, people may change their assets around, and look, assets need to be titled in the name of the trust, or the beneficiary needs to be the trust. If they move their money somewhere else, they might not have taken care of that piece of it. Okay, we catch that when we go through these annual reviews. How often do people actually change their plans? It's typically about every 5 to 7 years. And that's because either a trustee in that list has passed on, they want to replace them,
Gotcha.
or they've just kind of fallen out of favor with someone, and it's like, nah, I'd rather have different people here. Or the kids have gotten older. It's 2 kids. One of them, they got all the college scholarship money. The other kid went to private school, and they funded the whole thing. Okay, we want to adjust it so it's more of a 60-40 than a 50-50 split.
Gotcha.
So these changes happen on average about every 5 to 7 years, usually when the situation changes. But it's always good to check on this every year.
Well, and I think that's the benefit of working with individuals that want to do this, because things change and people forget, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you buy a new house and you forgot to move it into a trust, or you move out of state and you forget the trust is in California and you just moved to North Carolina, right?
Mhm.
And the laws are different. And so, as part of the National Referral Network, building that team, how important do you think it is not only for you to have a trusted team, but how important is it for clients to make sure that their team is speaking with each other to make sure these things are in alignment?
Oh, absolutely. If there are any 3 professions in estate planning that kind of need to be coordinated, it's the estate planning attorney, the financial advisor, and the CPA, because they all have different perspectives. This also comes up with things like Medicaid planning, because there's a tax angle, there's a financial and investment angle, there's the legal angle, and any of these professionals may have something that pops up and go, wait a minute, let's talk about this particular thing, because this decision that you're talking about has a lot of different ramifications. And if the team is all on the same page, you're just doing a world of good for your clients. I absolutely recommend that if you can do it, make sure you've got at least those 3 professionals, if not more, involved in this review every year.
No, that's perfect. Well, Jeff, I know that we could keep going. We want to try to keep these things short, but love to have you back on and we can dig into some of these nuances in a little bit more detail. But thank you for being part of the network. Thank you for being part of the professional insights this morning. If you like the video, please subscribe. Jeff's contact information is in the description below. Hit that thumbs up. We're here every Tuesday morning with these professional insights interviews. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next Tuesday. Thanks, Jeff.
Right. Thanks, Mike, and make it a great day.
You too.